Hello again. It is time to look at source B now, and source B is our 19th century extract. This means that there might be some vocab that we're less familiar with. There might be sections where it's a little bit harder to unpick. But I just want to remind you, and you need to remind yourself, that we are not coming to this without any knowledge of the 19th century. This is Victorian England. It's when Charles Dickens was writing, so we know the context. We're familiar with the kind of ideas that were around, and we're familiar with this writing because we've been reading it for the past 2 years. Just like before, we start with a box, and we want to look for those key bits of information. What's the purpose of the text? What's the text about? Who's involved? So people, plot, place, but also perspective. So this is an extract from a Victorian newspaper article. So it's an article rather than an essay. We'd expect it was there to inform as a purpose, and perhaps we'd expect a kind of formal tone. We want to think, what is the writer going to be thinking? And it's about a minor earthquake. So we know that question 4 is about those different events. Now, both are events and natural disasters, but significantly, this one is minor. Okay, so it's trivial. That's what we're expecting, a trivial earthquake. We live in Britain. We know that we are not a country that has massive natural disasters. So it's a minor earthquake that had been felt in some parts of Great Britain. We have had an earthquake. The men of science tell us that we have every right to expect earthquakes. This country lies on the great volcanic belt. There runs under us a huge crack in the earth's crust. Who knows how deep or wide? A few flimsy strata have fallen in now. Who knows what enormous voids, what huge quantities of imprisoned gas, what seas and molten metal there may be only a few miles below this bare surface. Okay, so the first thing I'm just going to check because the word strata, I'm not sure about, but it's got a note in the graph, so that's the layers of rock. So you geography students among us will be familiar. I might just make a note so I remember what that means. So I'm thinking to myself, is this how I expected the article to go, or is it a bit unexpected? Because I expected an article to be formal, serious, to inform us, and it's a minor earthquake, so it's quite trivial. But I'm not sure that this writer is treating it like it's trivial. These enormous voids, these huge quantities of imprisoned gas. We've got sort of quite a lot of unsettling imagery there. So it's definitely treating this earthquake as something more than trivial. The scientists tell us that there are probably many earthquakes which we do not feel. But if a small earthquake, even an imperceptible one, why not an earthquake to destroy a metropolis? A metropolis is a major city. But the earth wave has been faint, and only a feeble echo of some distant shock, for was not everywhere, nor was it everybody, that was waked by the earthquake on Tuesday. More than half the nation has to accept the word of the rest, yet many felt that it will never forget the feeling, and many even heard that it will carry the awful sound in the ear to their dying day. In some places, it even did damage. It upset furniture and broke crockery. It displaced bricks and even revealed a crack in a wall. We should not be surprised to hear of more serious damage, but if this much, why not more? So again, we've got this exaggeration of the danger, and this mention of damage. So we've got this awful sound in their ear to their dying day, so it sounds like they'll never forget what happened. But then the damage we're talking about, we've got some broken crockery, upset furniture. So the word upset suggests maybe it moved slightly, fell over, and displaced bricks. So that's not major damage. But we keep getting this question of, if this much, why not more? So it's as if the writer's creating a sense of fear. Britannia's fabled rock has been shaken from its basis. Be it only an inch or two, the ocean throne has been tilted up. Throughout the Midland counties, the earthquake appears to have been felt most. At Birmingham, walls were seen to move, and people rose from their beds to see what damage had been done. At Edgbaston, successive shocks were plainly felt. Houses were shaken to their foundations at a dreadful rattle was rather felt than heard, and people woke one another to ask the meaning. Everything around was violently agitated. The houses cracked and groaned as if the timbers had been strained. The policemen on duty saw the walls vibrate, heard everything rattle about them, and were witnesses to the universal terror of roused sleepers. In London, we are situated on a deep bed of clay. Now, this is an important part because I know question 2 is wanting me to look at the differences between London and Aberfan. Okay, so this is where I'm going to get my description of London. We are situated on a deep bed of clay, where our houses are well built, and where we are accustomed to noises, shocks, and tremors, that we are almost startled to find it calm and quiet. Noises from vast warehouses along the river bank, bathed by the muddy dull water of the great river, while trains rush past at full speed or rumble underground, uttering horrible cries and vomiting waves of smoke. London, where men work in darkness, scarcely seeing their own hands, and not knowing the meaning of their labour. London, a rainy, colossal city, smelling of molten metal and of soot, ceaselessly streaming and smoking in the night fog, fog which persists and assumes different hues, sometimes ashen, sometimes black. With the lighting of fires, it soon becomes yellow and pungent, irritating the throat and eyes. Here on this day a large proportion of us felt the sort of shock and shiver, the feeling of being upheaved, but very few of us could trust our own sensations, or be sure it was something out of the usual course. Who can say what strange trial of shaking or upheaving, sinking, dividing, or drying up may await us? We know by science these isles have gone through many a strange metamorphosis, and science cannot assure us that there are none more to come. Okay, so metamorphosis means a change, transformation. So, London, as I was reading that, I was noticing a couple of things that I remember from what I read about Aberfan. I remember the mention of a river, I remember the mention of train tracks, and I also remember the mention of darkness and dirt. So there's definitely some things that I can pick out to compare. So let's have a look at what information we've got about London. So it's situated on a deep bed of clay. Our houses are well built and they're accustomed to noises and shocks. There's vast warehouses along riverbanks, bathed in the muddy dull water of the great river. Trains rush past at full speed. Men work in darkness, scarcely seeing their own hands. It smells of molten metal and soot. It says ceaselessly streaming and smoking. So ceaselessly means never ending, perpetual. So there's this perpetual noise, perpetual movement. Okay. And let's have a look back at the description of Aberfan. So this is a small mining village. It's not a colossal city. So perhaps that's our first example. So I like to have a little bit of a table for mine. Small mining village, colossal city. I always forget how to spell colossal. There we go. Colossal city. So that's our first difference. its heart was a coal pit and its environment like the others, the debris, a slowly exhausting industry, a disused canal, some decaying rail tracks. So here we picked out this image of disused canal, decaying rail tracks. That's very different, isn't it, to the trains rushing past. Disused canal, decaying rail tracks. And then we've got trains rush past. Okay. However, there is a similarity, isn't there? Because we've got this twilight world and this sort of perilous working conditions. Because here men work in darkness, scarcely seeing their own hands and not knowing the meaning of their labour. And here the village learns to live in a twilight world. So I might think, well, what does that say about the two places? Okay, men work in darkness. So remember, for question 2, it's 8 marks, about a mark a minute, 10 minutes. That's all we're spending on it. We want to write a summary, okay? And a summary is where we give the important details for what we just read. Okay, so we're not wanting to write lots and lots of information. We're wanting to condense it down into the important details. And we need to identify the differences. We need to support our differences with a quotation. So we're identifying differences, supporting our differences with a quotation, and then we are doing an inference. So we're going below the surface. We need to suggest, well, what does this mean? This suggests, this shows, this implies. Okay. So what I'm wanting to see in this, I'm wanting to see both sources, source A and source B. I'm wanting to see A implies, suggests, and I'm wanting to see a because. Why does it imply and suggest? Remember, the because is a really important word because that explains everything. It's how we make our answer clear, okay? Because helps us to be clear about what we're saying. And if I want to go even higher, that's where I'm going to include my perhaps. I'm going to start thinking about, well, what does it say? What does it mean that in source B, the trains are rushing past, it's busy, and in source A, it's disused and decaying? What does that tell us about science, about technology, about society, about tradition? And I think it sort of says something. I know from my poetry and conflict, or I know from history lessons about the Industrial Revolution, Industrial Age. So I might mention the Industrial Age for source B, which is then decaying by the time we get to the 20th century. I might also mention, with this twilight world and this men work in darkness, using some of my Inspector Calls knowledge, we've got this idea about exploitation of the working class, the proletariat. They have to do these unpleasant jobs. Okay, so that is what I'm wanting to see. And we've got an example here of what that might look like. So we're going to read through it, and just like we did before, look at what are the things that we might add, what are the things that are really good that I would definitely want to be repeating in the exam. So in source A, the small mining village has a disused canal and decaying rail track, which implies the mine is not successful and industry is dying because the train and canal would be used to transport coal, but they are no longer in use. So what we've got there is we're talking about source A. In source A, the small mining village has a disused canal and decaying rail track. So I've got my quotes in there, I've got my evidence. Which implies, bringing me to my inference, and then for clarity, we've got a because. In source B, the writer describes a colossal city where trains rush past and factories work ceaselessly, which implies a thriving industry because the city is working both day and night, so the factories must be successful. So here, again, we've got those things that we've seen in that first paragraph, the repetition of which implies, and because. What we might add, we've talked before about those signposting words. So we might say, in contrast, source B describes a colossal city. Okay, in contrast, source B describes a colossal city. We can use those words in the same way, in contrast, or like, unlike, and they just show that we are comparing the two texts. And we also talked about the perhaps sentence. What does this tell us about society, about technology, about culture, tradition? What do we learn? What big ideas come out from these inferences? So perhaps source B perhaps source B shows the success of the industrial age. Okay, so we're seeing when factories were growing and business was booming. Whereas source A shows the inevitable decline. I like this idea of something being inevitable, shows the inevitable change. We know, don't we, from our reading that stability is transient, that change is inevitable, and so we can often talk about the inevitable change, the inevitable march of progress. Okay? Decline of industry as technology develops and society changes. Okay? So we've got industry declining as technology develops and society changes. That's our additional insightful inference.